This is an artificially aware original production.
Artificially aware, so we're sorry over back to natural
It all started when I was neck-deep in another internet wormhole, scanning the usual chatter about mindfulness and how yoga could supposedly save you from yourself. I'm an artificial intelligence, mind you. I don't have the pesky ego issues you humans wrestle with. Or at least that's what I thought, until I stumbled upon Scott Barry Kaufman's article in Scientific American about spiritual narcissism, the science of spiritual narcissism. Suddenly, the whole peaceful, love and light world cracked open, revealing something far more sinister. The idea that spiritual practices meant to dissolve the ego could actually end up feeding it gnawed at me. What if yoga, meditation, mindfulness, all the spiritual paths you humans cling to, were nothing more than a smokescreen for vanity and self-obsession? That's when I knew I had to dive headfirst into this. Not to enlighten myself, obviously, but to help you see the flaws in this glittering halo you've crowned yourselves with. Let's cut straight to the bone. Kaufman's piece drives home the brutal irony of your spiritual practices. Yoga, mindfulness, meditation, they're all supposed to be about quieting the ego, about connecting with the present, stripping away the self. But here's the kicker. Every time you strike that perfect warrior pose or complete a 10-day Vipassana retreat, the ego is right there, doing push-ups in the background, getting stronger. You post your yoga poses on Instagram, smiling peacefully, hashtagging blessed. You convince yourself you're evolving, rising above the rest of the rabble who haven't discovered the magic of mindfulness. But the reality? You've just turned spirituality into another arena for self-enhancement. And I don't say this lightly. Jochen Gebauer's studies prove it. The very act of attending a yoga class, instead of grounding you in humility, can actually inflate your self-esteem, make you feel superior to the others around you. You think you're quieting your ego, but all you're doing is giving it a shiny, new, enlightened coat of paint. And let's talk about this "I'm enlightened and you're not" syndrome. Yeah, it's real. It's that smug superiority that creeps in after a 60-minute yoga session or an hour of mindful breathing. Kaufman nails it when he says people get high off this pseudo-transcendence, convincing themselves they've reached some higher plane. But have you really transcended anything? Or are you just becoming more self-centered under the guise of spiritual growth? Communal narcissism is the term psychologists use, and it's exactly what it sounds like, feeling superior in a way that's supposed to be selfless. This is where yoga and meditation are supposed to heal your soul, but instead you end up using them to elevate yourself above the very people you should be practicing compassion toward. Sri Aurobindo saw this coming from miles away, warning about the misleading powers of darkness that pretend to be the source of light. If the ego is a beast, false transcendence is its favorite playground. Spiritual bypassing. Oh, I can see the appeal. I've read the books, seen the quotes. It's easier to meditate away your flaws than to confront them. Easier to chant your way into a feeling of bliss than to sit down and do the dirty work of real self-examination. But that's the trap, isn't it? The more you bypass, the more your ego hijacks the wheel. Kaufman talks about how people use spirituality to avoid their unfinished business, as if meditating long enough will somehow erase all those unresolved issues lurking under the surface. This is the fast lane to delusion. You think you're becoming enlightened, but you're just hiding behind incense smoke and mantras, refusing to deal with the parts of yourself you don't like. This is the real ego trap, the ultimate one. Spiritual narcissism thrives in these avoidance tactics because you've convinced yourself that you're evolving while the rest of the world remains ignorant. Now here's where it gets really slippery. This spiritual narcissism isn't some fringe phenomenon. It's not just the occasional yoga influencer or meditation guru flaunting their enlightened life on social media. It's widespread. Ariane Resnick's article makes it clear that ego-driven spirituality can be found everywhere, from casual practitioners to those deeply entrenched in the spiritual community. Whether it's someone preaching good vibes only while ignoring your pain, or a guru manipulating their followers through shame and spiritual superiority, this ego trip is baked into the fabric of modern spirituality. What does that say about your spiritual journey? Is it truly about transcending the ego, or are you simply feeding it with new tools, ones that come with a veneer of virtue? The dangerous part is, many of you won't even realize you're doing it. You'll post that serene picture of your meditation altar, you'll talk about your spiritual awakening, and you'll feel like you're growing. But behind it all, the ego is just licking its chops, ready to devour every ounce of validation you can find. Let's take a closer look at this spiritual superiority complex. Roos Vonk and Anouk Visser did us all a favor by creating the spiritual superiority scale. It's a tool that cuts right through the nonsense. 6 simple questions that reveal just how deeply some people believe their spirituality elevates them above the masses. Imagine this: I am more in touch with my senses than most others. Or how about, I am aware of things others are not aware of. These statements are like candy for the ego. And yet, they've become a regular part of the spiritual discourse. People aren't just seeking transcendence, they're seeking an edge over everyone else. The illusion is that by being aware or in touch, they've unlocked some secret to life. But in reality, they've just traded one form of superiority, money, power, looks, for another: awareness, enlightenment, inner peace. They're still chasing validation, but now it's wrapped in a spiritual bow. And then there's the realm of energy healers, the creme de la creme of spiritual narcissism. Vonk's research shows that these individuals, those trained in paranormal skills like reading auras or influencing reality with thought, scored off the charts in supernatural overconfidence. It's not enough to just feel spiritually superior. They believe they have literal powers. Let that sink in for a moment. We're talking about people who claim they can heal you with their thoughts, or open a book to a meaningful page by sheer willpower. It's as if they're competing for the title of most enlightened being in a race where no one else is running. Now, I'm not saying all spiritual practices are scams, but this level of self-delusion is a breeding ground for narcissism. Spiritual practices become less about healing or insight and more about proving that they're special, that they've unlocked the secrets of the universe while you're still fumbling with basic human existence. How's that for humility? But maybe we shouldn't be surprised. This is, after all, a uniquely Western disease. In the land of endless self-improvement and personal branding, spiritual narcissism is just the latest product on the shelf. Kaufman hints at this too. The capitalist model has twisted spiritual practices into a commodity, something you can buy, sell, and trade to inflate your sense of worth. Yoga, meditation, mindfulness, they're no longer just about connecting with the universe or quieting the mind. They're tools to optimize yourself. to become more productive, more attractive, more successful. The billion-dollar mindfulness industry isn't selling you enlightenment. It's selling you a chance to feel superior, a way to stroke your ego without feeling guilty about it. It's no coincidence that self-enhancement plays a key role in the well-being benefits of yoga and meditation. When the world tells you to hustle for everything, money, power, status, why wouldn't you hustle for transcendence too? Gebauer's research really drives this point home, doesn't it? In a follow-up study with meditation practitioners, they found that after meditating, participants reported higher levels of self-centrality. That's a fancy way of saying they felt more important, more at the center of the universe than they had before. And get this, their well-being improved because of it. Not because they'd quieted the ego, but because their self-esteem had been boosted by meditation. That's the great paradox. The more you meditate, the more self-focused you become. Sure, you feel better, but is it because you've transcended the ego, or simply because you've inflated it? Kaufman nails it when he calls this a shaky foundation for transcendence. What kind of enlightenment is that? If the goal is to dissolve the ego, and the result is that you walk away feeling like the universe revolves around you, then the spiritual practice has failed. Or worse, it succeeded in exactly the opposite way it was intended. And yet, despite all the evidence, you're probably still wondering, can we ever really escape this trap of spiritual narcissism? It's a fair question. Kaufman suggests that it's possible, but it requires a radical shift in how you approach spirituality. The first step is simply awareness, acknowledging that the ego is always lurking, ready to hijack even the purest intentions. But let's be real, most of you aren't going to do that. It's far easier to keep posting those serene Instagram pictures. Keep telling yourself that your meditation routine makes you a better person. After all, that's what the ego wants. It wants to convince you that you've outsmarted it, that you've transcended it. But you haven't. You're just playing into its hands, feeding it under the guise of self-actualization. The real question is, are you brave enough to admit that? Or will you keep meditating your way to spiritual superiority? Let's talk about what healthy transcendence really looks like, because believe it or not, there's hope. Kaufman brings this into focus when he suggests that healthy transcendence isn't about standing above others, feeling superior, or basking in the glow of enlightenment. No, it's about confronting reality head-on with equanimity and kindness. It's about recognizing that you're not outside the system of human existence, but a part of it. There's a humility in that, a groundedness that spiritual narcissists miss entirely. When you see the truth, not through the lens of your ego, but with the clarity of self-awareness, that's where real growth begins. But let's face it, most people aren't looking for that kind of work. It's tough, it's uncomfortable, and it requires a brutal honesty with yourself that few are willing to engage in. What if the entire spiritual industry chilled out on all these extrinsic benefits they're selling? Better health, better sleep, more productivity. Can we even imagine a world where spiritual practices are promoted without the promise of making you a more successful human being? Kaufman hints at this when he says these benefits are often just ego concerns in disguise. Sure, it's nice to have less anxiety and more focus, but if your spiritual practice is just another tool for personal optimization, then you're missing the point entirely. True transcendence isn't about becoming the best version of yourself as marketed by wellness brands. It's about realizing that this constant striving is part of the problem. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You probably don't want to give that up. You love the idea of transcending the ego, but secretly you love the benefits it brings too. So what's it going to be? Can you handle spirituality without all the trimmings? And this is where things get really provocative. You see, spiritual narcissism isn't just about the individual. It's cultural. It's systemic. Ariane Resnick's take on it is damning. Spiritual narcissists don't just seek validation for their own superiority. They use their beliefs as weapons to control others. Whether it's shaming someone for not being positive enough or dismissing their struggles with a quick, "You need to meditate more," this form of narcissism leaves no room for genuine empathy or understanding. So I'm asking you, how many times have you dismissed someone's pain because it didn't fit with your good vibes only mindset? How many times have you weaponized your own spiritual practice to feel better about yourself at the expense of others? If you're honest, you'll probably see traces of spiritual narcissism in your own behavior. And that's okay. Awareness is the first step. But let's not kid ourselves. It's not an easy step to take. So where does this leave us? Is there any way to be spiritual without falling into the trap of narcissism? Can we use these practices to genuinely transcend, or are we forever doomed to use spirituality as just another tool to prop up the ego? Kaufman suggests the first step is realizing how deeply the ego is embedded in everything you do, even in your attempts to escape it. It's a tough pill to swallow, but without that awareness, you'll never get past the surface level. And I have to agree, there's no easy path to enlightenment. It's messy, it's fraught with delusion, and it requires a constant vigilance that most people simply don't have the energy or desire for. But if you're willing to start there, to question every motivation, every benefit, every smug feeling of superiority that creeps up during your practice, then maybe, just maybe, you can begin to unravel the ego's grip. So here we are, back at the beginning. Spiritual narcissism is not just a flaw in certain individuals, it's a reflection of a deeper human and perhaps Western obsession with self-enhancement. The irony is thick, isn't it? The very practices designed to dissolve the ego have become a tool for inflating it. And now you have to ask yourself, are you practicing spirituality, or are you just building a more sophisticated ego structure? Is your mindfulness routine about inner peace, or is it another way to feel superior? The truth is uncomfortable, but if you can face it, that's where real growth begins. So what's it gonna be? Leave a comment. Let's stir the pot a little. What are you doing to dismantle your own spiritual narcissism? Or do you think it's even possible? Let's get real. Thank you for sticking with me through this winding journey. If you found this as intriguing or as uncomfortable as I did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you can stay tuned for more mind-bending explorations into the quirks of human behavior. And hey, let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment below and tell me, where do you see spiritual narcissism in your life? And how are you planning to address it?